Welcome back to the Nerd Corner podcast. This is Discovering Eden. I'm Jonathan,
I'm Brandon.
and today we are talking about something very, very special, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and basically the works of J.R.R Tolkien.
Especially coming off of our talk about C.S. Lewis. Obviously, you can't have C.S. Lewis without talking about Tolkien.
Their friendship, we've mentioned it in the last couple episodes, was incredibly important, I think, to both of them. But it played a huge role in C.S. Lewis's conversion. But yeah, so we're going to dive right in with the prayer.
Yep.
Lord, we just thank you for this incredible time that we get to spend together, talking about the things that we're passionate about, and just sharing your word through it, Lord. We just pray that as we engage in this conversation, if there's anything that's not from you, Lord, that it just falls on deaf ears. And Lord, we just, again, thank you for this incredible time that we get to spend each week. Amen.
Amen.
Bring on the bumper.
Bring on the bumper.
One.
As I accidentally cut off, actually.
I had a great joke. It was off the cuff.
Just go with it.
One does not simply walk into a bumper. We're not going to play the bumper again because that would be,
Yeah.
But you know what? It's okay. I'll get over it.
It's fine.
I only hold a grudge half the time, so Brandon won't know until probably next week.
Oh, no!
So we are starting with The Hobbit and the Silmarillion today.
Or at least touching on some of them. We're obviously not going to dive all too deep because there's a lot to cover.
Yes.
We only have a short time that we can even crack the surface.
Like an egg.
Oh. Yeah, that poor egg. Crack the surface. What are you doing? I hope it's hard boiled.
No.
No, it's overeasy.
So The Hobbit is something that we both have experience with. We both read it. To give a very brief synopsis of The Hobbit, it follows a hobbit.
A hobbit.
Isn't it?
Hobbits.
I feel like that's sufficient enough. It basically
It
tells us.
follows a hobbit, and even the way that Tolkien first wrote it, it's just there's a hobbit in the hole in the ground.
His name is Bilbo Baggins, and this is his story of kind of really stepping out of his comfort zone. He's going on an
It's
adventure.
the story of an adventure.
But yeah, I mean, he gets greeted by this old guy named Gandalf, very important figure, who kind of recruits him into this company of dwarves who are basically trying to reclaim their mountain kingdom from the evil, diabolical dragon Smaug. And then they go on an adventure. And the whole book, it is a journey story. I mean, that's what it is.
A journey in more than one aspect.
Yes.
So it's not only are you getting from point A to point B and returning.
As most journeys are.
It's also a story of the change in his perception.
Yes.
Like of Bilbo's perception.
Bilbo's character
of the
development
world.
is really fun.
It's basically character development, which is what I liked about it. And being able to even be there for the other company of dwarves.
Yes.
Where at the start he was kind of that outcast outsider because he's not like them.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets to like near the end, he becomes like one of them.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, it's that shift I'd rather be home eating third breakfast with my feet up by the hearth, you know,
I need
to
my 7 meals a day, dang it.
I think I want to go on another adventure. You know, kind of that's the kind of vibe that, you know, Bilbo goes through the entire story. You see that shift in courage, that shift in, you know, determination from him. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I mean, again, very simple story.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a very simple story. It's one of the ones that Tolkien first wrote.
yeah.
So, The Hobbit was written in 1937. So this is a little bit before, well, not a little bit before, quite a bit before the Chronicles of Narnia
Yeah.
were written, which were in the 1950s. And that's also when The Lord of the Rings was written, which is the 1950s. The Silmarillion, however you want to say it,
Silmarillion.
it's Silmarillion because the Silmaril or I can't even say it. You'll know if you know what you're. Yeah. You know if you know. Ta-da! I know
Welcome to
that's
the secret
helpful.
club.
Welcome to the Inklings.
That was a good one.
And that was 1997 or 1997. No, 1977. And this was the Silmarillion was published after Tolkien's death, so that was actually finished by his son Christopher.
Now, I've just got a brief question because I don't know much about the Silmarillion. I know you haven't read it either.
Well, I've read it, but like half of it because it's
Fair.
dense.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it just one big like lore book, like lore dump sort of thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, he has his legendarium.
Yeah.
The Silmarillion is its own thing, but
Okay.
it's essentially the lore of Middle Earth.
Gotcha. That's what I was kind of thinking, but
Like the start of Middle Earth,
sure.
let's say. And it's a heavy book.
I rented it from the school library when I was in high school once. I think I read the back, you know,
The
little
back
description,
cover, yeah.
and then I was like, yeah, I'm not going to read this. You know, not that I wasn't
Like
interested.
I wanted to because I read like The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and I'm like, I want to learn more about like Middle Earth, and then I read it and go, oh, that's deep.
My brain
My
hurts.
brain is an egg and it's fried.
We went from hard boiled to over easy to fried.
Exactly.
How many more egg metaphors can we throw in
Well,
today?
hopefully not the century egg. We don't want that stewing for a bit.
It'll be fine. Some
Well,
people love
maybe for Gollum.
That was a really bad Gollum impression, but that's all you're gonna get. Regardless.
Anyways. So, kind of, again, more backstory on Tolkien.
Yeah.
Coming off of C.S. Lewis. Like C.S. Lewis, Tolkien also participated in World War One. So they had this camaraderie, this companionship there
This
as
brotherhood almost.
well. And I think you see some of that in the writing because there's a lot of, especially with like Battle of the Five Armies, for example. That to me was a parallel to World War One.
Okay.
And his experiences within it, because there is loss, especially with spoiler warning, Thorin, and
I think it's Feely and Keely also.
yeah, Feely and Keely as well. But there's loss of significant friends that
Yes.
Bilbo had, but also I think kind of reflects Tolkien's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, Bilbo the character, I view as Tolkien.
Interesting.
And his journey, and kind of his own, like, whether you call it a faith journey or not, and some of these things he edited later, and I think to kind of include more of a Christian narrative, because he was a Christian, he's a Catholic. And especially later in life, he tied a lot more stuff into like a Christian narrative, especially within the Silmarillion, which I'll get to. But like to me, I can't help but look at Bilbo none other than Tolkien himself.
Interesting. But I mean, it makes sense too. I mean, with what you just said, like it makes a lot of sense when you look at it from that perspective of everything that happened, you know.
And I mean, he basically a lot of what hobbits do. I don't want to say this about like Brits or anything, but you know, they have their tea and crumpets, and you have tea time and all these things, like relaxed and kind of being in their shire, so to speak.
I love that too.
It's
Like,
it kind of symbolizes kind of where he is at,
yeah,
and Bilbo is the author of what this story of the Hobbit will
Yeah.
be. He's penning it down afterward.
there and back again, right?
There and back again. So it's Bilbo writing it, and to be honest, it's a reflection, for me at least, of Tolkien writing his There and Back Again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what the war was in a sense to him, you know. It was his,
And it's because I know a lot of people. Well, I mean, I don't know a lot of people that that have gone through like war or have been in like the military in
Sure.
some way or fashion. But I know at least one person who said it's really formed how they live, and especially in the faith background.
interesting.
With how everything happens, like you have to hold on to some sort of hope.
Yeah,
If that hope is not there,
you
it's
crumble.
really hard to like maintain composure, because there's a lot of stuff that happens. You know, you have post-traumatic stress, you know, of all these other symptoms that people have as like aftershocks.
Yeah,
and I and especially coming after the fact, like with the relationship between C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, being able to even talk about some of these things and even to put it into writing is something that was a remedy for them, at least. Because to me, as I read it, and even the way I've written my story in some aspects is a form of escapism.
yeah, I feel that.
So, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I definitely see the influences of it because I do it myself.
Yeah, it's almost a form of therapy, right? Like
Yeah, it's a form of therapy, whereas it doesn't eat you alive.
yeah,
As I feel like some of the things that, at least that I went through, that it didn't eat me alive when it happened because I put it into, and it doesn't disappear because I feel like the characters then impart on them all the pain and
But
all the
it's-
struggle that you
it's
are
a way
going
for you to
through.
process your emotions and what you're going through, in a very unique way.
So I didn't do as much research. Like, I don't know if he was close with anybody when he was serving.
Sure.
But I'd imagine he would have known people
Well, of course.
that
I mean,
would have been lost. And I mean, how could that not shape you in one way or another? And being able to even mention them, albeit subtly and
Sure.
indirectly, to give kind of a nod to that.
I find it interesting too that you when you hear of like I don't know what the term is in the military, but a company.
Yeah. Your platoon
Your
or
platoon.
whatever.
It's referred to as a company of dwarves,
Yeah.
a company of travelers. You see that influence there, and whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. But that's something that just I kind of just hit me while we were talking.
Yeah.
And you do see that brotherhood between the dwarves.
Yeah.
They're all closely tied to their cause. They all have this draw to the Lonely Mountain. This reason for wanting to reclaim it. And it binds them in brotherhood and fellowship. Which is, I guess, fellowship. That's a huge theme in a lot of Tolkien's works.
Yeah. and the journey
And the
different
journey
things
and-
like that, because you go together.
Yes.
And even when they split and like say the Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
where there's two different factions of it, but they're still united on the same front.
Right. It's this like-minded mindset that's drawing them still towards that same goal, that same mission. But
Yeah. So something that again stands out to me about Bilbo. Obviously, and this sets up everything in the Lord of the Rings, and even ties back to Silmarillion, is the One Ring.
yeah.
When he gets it, which Gollum holds, or Smeagol, or at least that's how we say it in like from what we know from the movies and everything, Smeagol, but it's Smeagol
Interesting.
or Smeagol or however you say it. I don't know. That's apparently how it was supposed to be pronounced or something similar.
Yeah.
I'll go with simplicity's sake
Just
and
go
say
Smeagol.
Smeagol, just because I feel like that's what people would know.
Yeah. That's a very interesting part of the story too. Because it's one of the first times, if I'm remembering right, Bilbo is separated completely from the group.
Yep.
It's in complete isolation, and all of a sudden there's this other figure there, you know. I lost my I had a train of thought, and now it's gone.
It's
It
left
left the
the
station.
It left the station.
I'm gonna go try to find it.
Hopefully it's not in the polar region.
Choo
Polar Express. So he ends up finding the ring after it basically drops out of Gollum's pockets, which I don't know how that exactly worked, but
I think just it fell out of Gollum's possession.
yeah, it fell out of Gollum's possession.
Where he stores it, I don't know.
And basically they have like a riddle game.
This is one of my favorite parts of the story. It's just fun.
And like I just love how the reason Gollum even recognizes what he's got in his possession is because of some mumbling that Bilbo was having. Man, what is this thing? What have I got in my pocket? And then he realizes that's a question. I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. Ooh.
Uh-oh.
And then Gollum's not happy.
No.
Nope. But he finds his way out.
Yes.
After, putting on
The ring. Escaping. But that's the last we see of Gollum in The Hobbit.
Yeah. And obviously he plays a very big part
does.
in The Lord of the Rings. But one of the things I wanted to give mention to is Bilbo had the chance to end Gollum.
Yeah.
To basically take him out.
Yeah.
And he chooses not to. Which, obviously, with The Lord of the Rings, was huge because that's actually what led them to be successful in the end against Sauron.
Yes.
And to put the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom.
Yes.
To essentially undo the ring and the power it contains, let's say. We'll get to that later, but
This might be a stretch, but it's just kind of a thought that popped into my head. With that chance to take Gollum out, he doesn't. Do you think that could symbolize some sort of, again, going to maybe Tolkien's war background, like a symbol of mercy against something that is so that you would view as corrupted or evil?
Even obviously, when I read it, I read it through the fact that like Bilbo's taking pity on him.
Yes.
So he takes pity on Gollum, and I think because he sees himself in Gollum.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, Smeagol too. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a hobbit.
Yes.
And it's two at one point.
He was a hobbit at one point, and now he's like
this
400 year,
you know,
and that's due to the ring's influence.
His life,
And I guess kind of from that we can hop into Gollum's character.
I think it's about time.
It's a fitting. So obviously in the movie, people know Gollum as basically Two-Faced.
Yes.
Two distinct personalities. I like how Samwise Gamgee likens it. You got Slinker and you got Stinker. Slinker's the nice, basically babying up to you, saying, yeah, like just agreeing and
Yes.
being that it's his good-natured side of which
It's
is
what remains.
Smeagol. It's what remains of his
Former life, I guess you
yeah.
could say. Yeah.
And then you got Stinker, which is the bad personality of Gollum,
Yes.
which he's named Gollum because of the coughing
Sound
that he makes.
Yeah.
And obviously, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, it's from the corruption of the ring.
Yes.
Basically prolonging his life.
But taking any sense of humanity away with it. Well, I mean, again, you've seen that Smeagol side, but you see it drained away.
And one thing, like when you put on the ring, Sauron sees you.
Yes.
So, and something that Smeagol eventually does is hides from it. So goes into the cave to be unseen, or different things like that, or you think you're unseen, but
it's kind of. No, I'll save that. I'll save that thought. Never mind.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
So, obviously, the ring is an image, at least for me, of sin.
Yeah.
And how it can corrupt us. And it sticks with us.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because I think when we look at sin from at least a human perspective, it's something that is meant to entice us. You see that with the ring. It's this beautiful piece of jewelry.
Yeah,
that
it's something that
you.
you want to possess. And usually what the One Ring is you have dominion over everything.
Yes.
And that's the false advertisement, I'll say,
that
it gives.
But, the more of it you take on, the longer you wear that ring or whatever,
the longer it starts plaguing your mind with all these other things. It
destroys you. It eats away at you. And it's, again, that's very representative of Gollum. I mean, we see somebody who had a life before, fall to the wayside and really just be crippled by this horror and this.
And I think, honestly, Gollum represents humanity.
That's a really good way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Especially for how long he was plagued and twisted and everything like that. But it's not like Smeagol, the good side, ceased to exist.
No, it's still there.
There's still hope in the humanity aspect. And what brings that out is Frodo. Who serves as a beacon or a safe place for Gollum to enact that. Because you don't really see Smeagol or the good nature in his interaction with Bilbo.
No. Not at all, really.
You only see it with Frodo. Which I'll get to that when we talk about Lord of the Rings.
More in depth, yeah.
But it's an interesting aspect of the company we have can influence or impact how we interact with one another.
It is interesting too. I mean, Gollum spends so much time in those caves, wholly dependent on the ring. And again, it's that idea of isolation. I think, and that's the same with sin, right? You almost become dependent on it.
Dependent on
it.
And
you isolate yourself because there is shame in it. It's, I think, deep down in your heart wrong. But, you hide from the world, but you keep feeding off of it, and it doesn't nourish you. It destroys you. But like you said, it's when Frodo comes in that you start he's starting to, return to his old self just a little bit.
Even though Frodo is in possession of the
That's
ring.
right.
But he almost sits like a puppy for Frodo.
Yes.
Because he's almost in command of it in some weird way. But
we'll dive deeper into that because there's a lot there to unpack.
And I guess we could go and hop into like the actual narrative style of The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings also follows this as well, and that's in the mythic style of basically coming up with story and story creation.
Yeah.
So I guess if you wanted to tie or go into some of that, and then I can jump off of some of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the mythic, influence, you see a lot of that in The Hobbit. You see a lot of that in Middle Earth as a whole, specifically with Norse mythology.
Yep.
And again, you've got your easy ones, dwarves, elves, dragons, kind of all of that stuff. You see a lot in Norse mythology. And with The Hobbit, I mean, very much, the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain. You've got the elves of Mirkwood. All of that, kind of stuff.
Or even in the style that it's written in a chapter by chapter.
Where
there's always some force
event.
of conflict or event.
Right.
And that you carry through.
You've got, the chapter with the trolls where there's your conflict for that chapter, and then you've got
you have
Mirkwood,
the stone giants.
The stone giants and the goblins and
there's all these different things which follows a very epic style narrative that they use in epics and myths in different poetic ways of writing. And it's definitely to the influence of Tolkien of writing some of these things, because one of the more influential things for him that he wrote and was able to kind of do a deep dive into was Beowulf, which was Old English epic or tale or legend.
Give a little background to Beowulf. This is something that I know of. I haven't,
to be honest, I probably should have looked up what it was. I know of it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm in the same vein, but I know it had a lot of influence
on Lord of the Rings
on Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, because Smaug, for example, is taken from like Beowulf and the depiction of dragons, but also from like Fafnir in Norse mythology and the Volsung and the poems of all that. And even that's how you get the dwarves' names. All of the dwarves' names, aside from Balin and Gandalf. And Gandalf is also one of the names that's set, is from the Volsung in Norse mythology. So Gandalf obviously does not only appear in Lord of the Rings and all that, and how his importance to everything, again, as a really important figure, and is almost like a guide for basically the company of dwarves in everything that happens. So obviously there's ties to Norse mythology there. And again, going to the way that Tolkien wrote, when Tolkien first wrote The Hobbit, it had no Christian oriented. It was just him writing.
Yeah.
And it followed the narrative of myths and legends and epics and stuff like that. And to be honest, that's why I feel like it's more of a retelling of his experience with
World War
I. Is that actually what it is? I don't know. But that's something I gathered from it. And it only was after the fact that he started editing and reworking some of the things that he changed, like in what he initially wrote, to match more of different Christian narratives or different things like that. And some of them are subtle. Now, like, some of the changes don't seem to do much of anything, like changing like tomatoes into pickles, for example. That doesn't mean anything.
Right. I always had the at least comparing him to C.S. Lewis, and I could be completely off about this, but it's as you said, it was always more subtle. At least
Yeah.
for the most part.
Whereas C.S. Lewis was a lot more in your face.
With his
This is a
allegory.
Christian like metaphor or
Yes.
allegory. He wouldn't like to be calling it an allegory, but
Right.
it's more allegory than I would say that Tolkien's stuff was. Even though Tolkien's was also allegorical, but more in the journey.
Sure. And it was, yeah, I mean...
Whereas C.S. Lewis, I felt, was more biblically based, although there was the journey aspect of it.
For sure.
Which I think is more of like Voyage of the Dawn Treader, different things like that. That's more your journey. But obviously you have the last battle. That's Revelation.
Yeah.
You have Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
The crucifixion.
That's the crucifixion, resurrection. Like some of these are more biblically based.
For sure.
Whereas
you still see those Christian ideas in Tolkien's work.
they're
but
just
they're not
much more subtle.
Yes, this isn't, an exact or a retelling of this book of the Bible or something like that, or
And something that is different again about C.S. Lewis to Tolkien is Tolkien. He goes about writing his stuff from the basis of like Norse and putting his own little spin on different things. It's not necessarily his first inclination to have gone Christian. It was in like what I read. It was coincidental that it shared some of these things because it wasn't his first intent.
Right. It was almost just, this is what happened as I'm writing it. You see those influences on your life naturally kind of, for lack of a better term, creep onto the page.
Whereas C.S. Lewis was very
intentional
with all the different tie-ins and everything.
Yes.
And it's within the edits afterward that Tolkien becomes a lot more intentional with it. Although most of it at this point was already written, so it's just little tiny edits here and there. There's little snapshots.
Yeah.
And I'll mention some of those next week. Or at least one of them that really stood out to me. But yeah. So with the myths and everything, obviously there's aspects of Norse mythology very prevalent in it because it's, again, some of Tolkien's bread and butter was like Norse mythology, Beowulf, all these kind of things. So either Germanic or English in origin. But even in the lore that Tolkien created, there's aspects of it that are shared with different myths, which also include different events in the Bible as well. So different similarities are, obviously, you have your story of creation. I mean, C.S. Lewis had this with
Magician's Nephew.
Tolkien does this in the Silmarillion. With the basically creation of Middle Earth, and the tree, which again is very similar to Yggdrasil, or at least for what I perceive it as, and the Tree of Life in that aspect. But it's kind of funny because you get Tree of Life, you have Yggdrasil, because you see the Tree of Life and good and evil in the Bible.
And then you got
Yggdrasil, different...
The World Tree.
The World Tree, other different aspects of... There's similarities, and it also ties into a lot of Tolkien's thinking of some of these myths, or a lot of the myths and legends that you hear actually tie back to God. So that all these aspects are all talking about the same thing, but told differently. So a lot of them tie back to God, even if it calls it different gods or whatever, as people don't know. And like one of the things that I think of is like Tower of Babel. Everybody's talking in different languages and everything like that. But you see a lot of these similar stories, similar happenings happening in all these different myths. Why is that? And I think that's kind of where Tolkien's stance is, and a little bit of my own as well, because I think they have to be writing about something. Because you can't just have the same thing happen
In all these
in
different
20-something different cultures at vastly different periods of time
Yeah.
to all talk about similar things happening.
It's like there had to be something,
Like,
that happened
how
that was
many-
influencing all of
How
these.
many different creation stories are there?
Every myth has one, right?
Like, just about every myth or legend has one. Even Native Americans, anything. Anything. And they had no relation to each other at all. They wouldn't have known. Unless there was one instance where everybody experienced the same thing.
Well, it's even the same with, the flood story.
Yep. And
So many myths and cultures have a flood narrative.
Yep.
Which is
and
indicative-
not just places that, flood regularly.
Yeah.
Say like Egypt with the Nile, for example.
it was a worldwide flood, sort of.
And it's not just saying, oh, there's flood narratives because all the civilizations were near water and it always flooded because that's what they do. No, there's instances where, and it's worldwide spread.
Yeah.
It's all around the world.
But it's indicative of that there was something that happened that was to such a great degree that, it influenced all of these cultures. And I...
So even within like a major flood, for example, that's in Babylonian or Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
Even
That's
that
the big one that I know outside of the Bible.
the
is
Epic of Gilgamesh has a flood story in it, and that's one of the, like, I guess, quintessential "this is an epic"
Yeah.
and myth/legend that we from ancient Sumer.
Yes.
Ancient Babylon, which is huge. And there's also one in Greek, and you have that in Chinese as well, and just other ones as well that, and obviously the Bible with Christian narrative, or you have Judgment Day. So you have that with the Egyptians, with the weighing of the heart on the scale, whether it's heavy or light, determines whether, well, you get eaten or you don't, and you go on and be okay. Or you have, obviously, Valhalla
Yes.
in Norse, and different aspects of that as well, which is more on the war and everything like that, on that side of things, in Revelation, different aspects. But one way or another, there is a day of atonement or a day of judgment. And then there's just something that also came to mind is like different, and kind of what made this come to mind. It came to mind at me for C.S. Lewis as well, in the animism aspect of things.
Sure.
So having the talking animals, different things like that. It made me think of the super religious or super spiritualized religions that would focus in on some of these things.
Sure.
So whether that's Hindu or Shinto in like Japan, for example, or even Egyptian. There's all these extra spiritual sides of things. You see, like in Shinto in Japan, you see all the shrines, the yokai, the demons, angels, all these kind of things. Well, maybe not so much angels and that, but
that spirit.
You have that spirituality side of things.
Yes.
And especially when you kind of get into the Silmarillion, is where I think that spiritual side really impacts. Because then you get into like angels and all that kind of stuff. Because it's something that's often glossed over in the Bible. Because obviously you have archangels, you have the whole...
The hierarchy.
The hierarchy and different aspects in that. Because you have like Michael, Gabriel, other ones that are named that we know of in the Bible.
But then you've got
But
all these
then
other
you have all
cherubim
these
and,
other...
seraphim and...
you have all these other angelic beings that we just simply don't really know.
They're referenced.
They're
but we don't
referenced, but we
know-
don't really know anything of
There's
that.
not a ton of detail on.
No. And I think that's intentional, obviously, because we're human. We can only grasp so much, and which is why Gabriel takes a form of more human, like different aspects of those things.
Yeah.
And like Tolkien, like these similarities with all these different myths and legends, they can't be just mere coincidence. Obviously, gods are associated with powerful forces in nature in a lot of these myths and legends, such as like fire, water, life, death, all these aspects that control humanity, and that's out of control of humanity, rather, because you can't really control whether you live or die unless you're dumb. But
Still waiting for that boss, Brandon.
oh no.
He's back.
Obviously, we can't water bend, we can't fire bend, we can't earth bend like an Avatar.
Darn it.
Wish
There
we
was my
could. Wish we
wish.
we could. You know, what's your superpower? I can make water whenever I want. Ice.
It's like Spider-Man just.
It's ice, baby.
Copyright strike.
It's like what? Water broke. No. Anyways. Man, I lost where I was going. Oh yeah. So I know we're totally not even going on Hobbit. Actually, this is talking about Tolkien in general. Okay,
That's right.
So
The Hobbit was a red herring.
So some of the one of the things I actually thought about when I was kind of doing some research on kind of the myths and legends and everything that he was going off of, it reminded me of like the similarity between like the Ten Commandments and the Code of Hammurabi.
Do tell.
So the Code of Hammurabi, okay, which is ancient Babylon again, like the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yes.
It's ancient Sumer. It's basically formulates the way of, I guess, equality.
Sure.
Let's say. So that's where you get the phrase eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's the Code of Hammurabi.
Yeah.
And where the Ten Commandments is similar is like it references the Code of Hammurabi, but in a way where it's like you shall not do this, you shall not do this. Like these are things you do not do. And then Jesus obviously expounds on those 10 commandments of saying what you can't do, and then say this is what you should do, or expounding on the fact that you do this, but I say do this. So kind of giving a more personalized thing of doing, like, obviously there is like the whole equality thing in like Exodus and all the laws and everything there. And Moses at that time, I definitely would have known the Code of Hammurabi.
Yeah.
Because Sumer was still there. I mean, Egypt was thriving for long time.
It was the power at the.
It was one of the quintessential powers of the ancient world. It was the quintessential power because it had the Nile and it had the breadbasket,
Which is, those are important resources.
Water is very important.
Yes.
Because with water comes life, but with that also comes death. So that's why you have a lot of the life, death things. But anyway, kind of getting back to The Hobbit and back to Silmarillion or Silmarillion.
Silmarillion. Just ignore me.
Say it however many times you want.
Try saying it 5 times fast.
So, the Silmarillion. One of the things I really wanted to talk about was the Christian aspect of it. And this was, again, near the end of
Tolkien's life. He's kind of looking back.
Yeah, he's looking back at it. And this is the formation of Middle-earth, and kind of serves as the preamble or prologue to the events in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, even though he wrote those 2 books before he wrote the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
And honestly, he was just going to stop at The Hobbit. He was told by his publisher, make a sequel. He's like, oh, okay.
And you know what? The sequel ended up inspiring a lot of the tropes and ideas that have
really the whole
fantasy genre.
Yeah, the whole high fantasy genre stemmed from
So whoever Tolkien's publisher was at
Tolkien
the time,
and C.S.
good
Lewis.
on you.
This is what people want. This is what they crave.
But
Not Lemnisper. So part of the Silmarillion, you have really 2 key characters that stand out.
okay.
So you have Melkor, or Morgoth as he was later called.
Yeah, and what is the role these characters kind of play the basic role?
And I'll say the second name. So Eru Ilyav, I can't even say it. Iluvatar. I butchered saying that. He writes in a. There's ways he like puts letters together that makes it hard to say. It's Ilu Vatar, so Iluvatar.
Okay. Iluvatar.
Yeah, something like that. Something similar to that. But to me, and I don't think this is coincident. Like, I think this is intentional. Like, Iluvatar is similar to God.
Okay.
So that's the God of Christianity, mind you. So creator God. It reminded me of the term Elohim, which means creator God. Iluvatar, which is the Elohim part.
Yeah.
Like, and it starts with E. So like Iluvatar, like yeah.
Kind of a similar.
It's similar. It's not the same, obviously. So, but it's a really niche little nod to that.
Yeah.
And especially since that's a creation of Middle Earth story, all that kind of thing. And then you have Melkor, which is Lucifer.
Mm.
You know, before Lucifer fell. And then Morgoth, which is Satan after he fell. And obviously Lucifer's story, I think, is more Catholic based. You don't really hear it so much in, Pentecostal or other circles or other different.
So that was something I was kind of
things.
interested in talking about a little bit, is because Tolkien was a Catholic.
Yeah.
So you obviously, I would imagine, see much more of that influence there, and I think
Yeah,
you see that with that story of Melkor.
Melkor. Yeah. And Melkor was basically the driving evil of what kind of put the bad things in motion for Middle Earth. And that was, Melkor is the one, or I guess I should say Morgoth at this point. So Morgoth, known as the Dark Lord, he's the one who forges the One Ring.
Okay.
In the Fires of Mount Doom, to basically hold dominion over all the people, and basically entice other people. So he gives the rings to all the, gives it to the dwarves, to humanity, to the elves, and just basically controls them that way. Basically saying this will give you all that you desire here, like whether it's your wisdom, whether it's your wealth, whether it's whatever.
It's that promise of something.
It's the promise.
grander.
It's the false advertisement because the One Ring controls it.
It's your serpent in the garden sort of moment, almost.
And basically, it's kind of associated with the fall of Numenor, which are the humans of that time. And it kind of reminds me of the fall of Adam, the fall of humanity. They could have lived forever, but sin happened, and they were taken out by it.
Yeah.
And taken out of the garden. And obviously you have the Silmarils and all that good stuff. They're chasing the light, getting these lights and the trees and all that kind of stuff too. And to be honest, I'm not entirely 100% positive of what happens in the Silmarillion, just like a brief covering, because I went through half of it. It's really deep and dense. But it's the tie to like Lucifer and like God that really sticks out.
For sure.
Because it's basically it's a war and a match between the two of them. So like yeah.
Did you lose your train of thought too?
Yeah, the train also left the station.
Yikes, I still haven't found mine.
I wrote other things down here. Let's see if I have anything here. Oh yeah. I don't know why I forgot to mention that. Okay. So Morgoth did a lot of things, and created a lot of things, or I guess made a lot of things. So one of which is dragons, which we see in Smaug, which we'll get to. I almost forgot to get to Smaug. Which I don't know how we forget to do that.
And the Hobbit was a red herring. I said it earlier.
And then Balrogs.
Yes.
Which are also very interesting. Also, they're corrupted by Morgoth. So they're more, I guess, angelic beings, if you would say, in the lore of Middle-earth.
No, this might be a stupid question, but in the movies, at least, the Balrog is referred to as a demon. Is that the same in the books? Is it referred to as almost this demonic?
They're servants, basically, under Morgoth.
So it fits with that kind of notion.
Well, they're corrupted angelic beings.
Yes.
Like they're creations, but they were corrupted.
Okay.
So you can call them, I guess, fallen angel lieutenants.
It's that same idea, right? Like
they're fallen.
Fallen servants of the bad guy.
Yeah. So one thing that I thought was interesting, the dragons fought in like the War of Wrath or something, in like the Silmarillion, or at least in the Legendarium. And to me, Balrogs are the embodiment of the sin of wrath, like one of the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah.
Dragons being like greed, wrath,
which you see with Smaug,
and like so all these different aspects of different sins, or the 7 deadly sins. Though, like wrath and greed really stuck out to me. Mm-hmm. You have pride, or at least a little bit of that with Smaug, at least as well. He's more wily when it comes to it. And Smaug is the last of the named dragons. There's 4 named dragons.
Interesting.
But the only one you really ever hear about, at least in The Hobbit, is Smaug.
He's the primary antagonist.
There's one also, the father of the dragons, in the Silmarillion. I didn't really get to that point, so I can't really speak into it. But yeah. Basically, more way of controlling everything that way. Yeah.
So let's unless you have something else from your sheet that you.
Let's talk about Smaug.
I was just gonna say that seems like a perfect diving off point. So Smaug is I mentioned earlier, the primary antagonist in The Hobbit, which is kind of funny because he's only there at the end of the book.
Rar.
But Rar is right.
Rar.
Really, I think that's all we need to say about Smog.
Just, rar. I big scary. I got shot by arrows.
Dinosaurs.
Rar.
But Smog's presence and influence is something that is definitely felt throughout the entire book because his presence and his dominion over the Lonely Mountain at the time is the driving force for why the dwarves want it back, you know?
Yeah.
So he may not, be this character that's going to be on every page of the book or showing up all the time, but his presence is felt. And I think Tolkien does a really good job of building him up as this intimidating figure that, when they finally confront Smog, it's going to be a big deal. And it is. Except it's not the dwarves who end up taking Smog down in the end. It's
Bard the Bow. It's Bard the Bowman. Woohoo!
But yeah, let's. You mentioned before of the name dragons. Smog is the important one in the Hobbit, obviously, but that he represents this notion of greed, the sin of greed, and a little bit of pride.
Greed,
Let's start with the greed thing because I think that's the most apparent.
His bed was gold.
Gold, treasure. Basically, he's Scrooge McDuck, just a lot less friendly.
He's Scrooge McDuck with bigger wings. Imagine that. What are dragons? Well, essentially they're ducks, but with really big wings and can breathe fire.
There's another snippet into the creature series we'll get to eventually. Dragons.
Clip that for
same thing.
There we go. That's our clip for the YouTube short. Just talking about this. This is Scrooge McDuck. Actually, he's a dragon.
Rar.
Rar. Ferocious. Greed. Just shoot him under the wing and he'll be clipped and he'll be gone.
Now, besides, just for the sake of discussion, obviously besides, the whole treasure thing, why do you think, or do you think it was intentional that Tolkien leaned into that, idea of greed, that sin of greed?
I mean, not only is it impactful for, I think, humanity in general,
Sure.
like everybody's going to be chasing that greed or wanting more land, wanting more, whatever. Like, and you look at what the World Wars were even based off of.
Sure.
It's, well, we don't like how this is going. We want A, and you're not letting us have it, so war. Or, World War II, you have Germany saying, oh, we don't deserve to be put down like this, so we're going to fight back.
Sure.
For their detriment, ultimately. But it's obviously greed is one of the 7 deadly sins for a reason. It's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with, along with like envy, which I think is partly due to that. Not to say that Smaug was envious at all. He's more of, I lust the gold, like I want it.
He almost calls
greed,
sin of lust too.
Well, and that's almost why I get like my precious is almost like that lust kind of aspect, even though it's not the same thing.
No, it's not this.
It's more greed and I want this, in that aspect. But Smaug is definitely prideful.
Yes, and I wanted to get into that a little bit too.
Where he's like, you cannot defeat me, all that aspect. And basically, Bilbo is sneaking in, finds out the fact, he's missing a scale.
It's almost interesting, and again, it's that idea of pride, how it clouds your judgment a little bit. But he is taken down by not only a very humble figure in Bard the Bowman, kind of a simple guy.
I mean, his name is Bard, and he has Bowman in his title.
but he's also taken down by an arrow.
Yeah.
This mighty dragon felled by a single arrow is a very interesting,
It's his Achilles heel. Huh?
Yes, that's a great way of
Yeah.
putting it. It's his Achilles heel. Smog's own.
Although it got
his
his
Achilles scale,
It's his Achilles scale. It's
or lack thereof.
Yeah, lack thereof, and it was in the left breast instead of the leg or the whatever. But anyway,
it's the idea of it, right? The pride clouds your judgment, and you almost completely forsake the fact that you have a glaring weakness, big fella. But
look at the log in your own eye.
Exactly. But yeah, I find that a very interesting little tidbit of the story, that it's not the dwarves that take him down. It's a human from Lake Town.
And to be honest, the dwarves didn't really do much of anything.
No, they didn't. They really just kind of sat outside the mountain and were like, what do we do? There's a dragon in
Bilbo's in there.
He's the burglar.
If he fails, rest in peace, my lad. Well, I guess it wouldn't be pieces; you'd be charred.
It is interesting, what was their plan? Let's be real. I don't remember. Did they have a plan? Like, if things all went to crap, how do we?
It's not our fault, Gandalf. He went on his own.
The Eagles get the Eagles.
Actually, we may have convinced him, but it's not our fault. It's not our fault.
I guess that. And again, I haven't read the book since high school, so it's been a while. Maybe there was, some sort of contingency plan, but
I don't know.
That might be a glaring plot hole in the book.
What happens if Bilbo goes? Well,
because let's be real, the dwarves would probably be mincemeat if they all just tried to rush Smog,
Well, and then you have Battle of the Five Armies too. Like, again, what did the dwarves do? Let's hide in the castle. Like, let's hide in Erebor.
Yeah.
Gotta protect the treasure, says Thorin. Which
doesn't go so well for him.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But it's some of that, and yeah. Well, do you have any? Some of the other topics I want to talk about next episode.
Well, then I think this would be, after that long silence, a good spot to maybe cut it off in the most awkward way possible, so that we can talk about Lord of the Rings next. And
we'll just cut it at some random time.
Yeah, we'll just stare at the camera deeply. Just Brandon reaches for his mouse. Is that Smog in the window?
Oh no, it's a fireball! Well, on that note,